Have you ever noticed how quickly the mind creates meaning? Someone didn't reply, you think they're ignoring you. A friend becomes quiet, you wonder if something goes wrong. A colleague simply says interesting, you immediately assume they disagree. What's fascinating isn't whether these interpretations are right or wrong, it is how effortlessly they appear, almost before we notice them. We often think we are seeing the reality, but perhaps we are only seeing our interpretations of the reality. If that's true, then how often are we reacting not to reality, but to the stories we quietly create? Most misunderstandings don't begin with misinterpretations. They begin much earlier. The mind quietly finishes the story. By the time new information arrives, our first explanation already feels true. Not because we are irrational, it's just simply because it's how our human beings make sense of the world. Recently, I spoke with someone learning languages across different cultures. They said something simple. Understanding doesn't always happen when something is explained. Sometimes it happens later, after experience, after time, after distance. And that made me think, maybe understanding isn't about something we receive. Maybe it's something that forms slowly without us noticing. So perhaps the goal isn't to stop interpreting. Perhaps the real skill is learning to notice the interpretation is already happening. That made me wonder, has anyone ever learned to observe the process more clearly? This is one reason I keep returning to Chinese literature, not because it gives answers, but because it makes invisible habits visible. Lu Xun once wrote, 希望本是无所谓有，无所谓无的. Some readers hear hope, others hear uncertainty. The sentence never changes, the reader does. And that's perhaps what makes the sentence so powerful. It doesn't simply just reveal something about hope, it reveals something about us. So maybe the real question isn't what does this sentence mean? Maybe the better question is, what made it mean that to me? The more I think about it, the more I wonder if wisdom begins one step earlier than we imagine. Not with better answers, but with better interpretation. If interpretation is unavoidable, then perhaps the real practice is to improve the quality. Because the quality of our decisions, the relationships, our learning depend less on receiving more information and more on learning to interpret more carefully. Perhaps wisdom begins the moment we hesitate before our first conclusion. And if that's true, then Chinese stories are doing something very different than I first expected. Chinese stories rarely tells us what to think. Instead, they quietly help us to notice how we think. No matter it's about Lu Xun, 庄子、老子，或者是中国的古诗歌. Maybe that's the reason why these stories have survived for like more than thousands of years. Not because they provide fixed answers, they do not, but because every generation discovers something different inside them. So I'd like to leave you with one question. What is one belief you are holding today that might actually be an interpretation rather than reality? I'll see you in the next Chinese Brain Story.